In a 37-day campaign, they spent nearly $70 billion. And that's all without any parliamentary oversight. $70 billion in a 37-day campaign works out to over $1.9 billion a day.
Boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you all had a great Victoria Day and enjoyed your long weekend. It's been a few days since I've made a video, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Now that actually was the opening to Lorne Gunter's newest video called Where's the Accountability? And here he's talking about the extra $400 million that the Liberal government decided to spend during the campaign period, unapproved by Parliament. Take a listen.
Now, on a good day, the federal government spends about $1.5 billion anyway. But they were spending $400 million a day in unapproved spending over the entire 37-day campaign. It's the most ever spent by a government when Parliament isn't sitting, by a government while there's a campaign going on. The most ever spent in Canadian history.
Now, if the base numbers weren't astronomical already, the extra spending of $400 million is just insane. Hasn't this guy been going on and on about us being in a crisis? I mean, you can find articles from February of him saying, we are in a crisis amid the US trade war. Back in March, PM Mark Carney says Canada is in a moment of crisis. You even have one in April. Mark Carney lays out his plan for the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. And just last week, when he swore in his cabinet, he said that this new cabinet is aimed at dealing with Trump and the housing crisis. Now, if that was the case, then I'd be like, great, let's do it. But they haven't been showing any sort of signs that that's what they are working towards. These guys are still going to be taking their summer vacation when we are having an affordability crisis, as clearly stated. And just last week, when we were talking about food prices going up, we now have CBC putting out videos like this saying how you can trim your supermarket bills as grocery prices rise. How about you deal with the grocery prices? Don't go on your summer break. Stop spending unnecessary amounts of money. Where is the accountability of this government? Because it seems like none of the ministers actually know what the hell they're talking about. Francois Philippe Champagne last week said that there wasn't going to be a budget. Then Mark Carney had to come out and say that there would be a budget. But Mélanie Joly said, well, budgets take a long time to make, but Canadians shouldn't worry because economically this government is the best.
But you don't think a budget is needed right now?
Well, I think a budget takes a long time to do, but I think also it's important that we are able to inform Canadians. We are the most economic government in years.
Now, how on God's green earth this woman came up with a statement like that just blows my mind. But she's not the only one. A lot of these ministers are getting targets on their back. Gregor Roberts, the new housing guy, talking about how house prices shouldn't come down. When nobody can afford a house, a condo, let alone an apartment, you have the radical environmental, well, no longer the environmental minister, Steven Guilbeault, talking about pipelines, kind of poking the bear in Alberta, where Danielle Smith actually made it very apparent how she feels about the relevance of Steven Guilbeault.
Steven Guilbeault still making headlines on his opposition to pipelines. So are you more or are you less hopeful that Alberta will see meaningful collaboration from this federal cabinet?
I'm looking at Steven Guilbeault trying to be relevant again. He's been relegated to the role of Minister of Flags and Fireworks, and he has no role in the environment anymore, but he's still trying to steer the agenda.
Now, I gotta say, if I'm being completely honest, I hope that he does continue with his agenda because maybe it'll force Mark Carney to kick him out of cabinet. Now, the actual reality of that, I don't think is very high since I believe Guilbeault was a key factor in Mark Carney's success within Quebec. But when you have other political pundits, you have even Liberal members saying that Guilbeault gave false information. He shouldn't be talking about a file that's no longer his. He should stop undermining Mark Carney. And then factor in on top of that, you have the CBC bringing on oil executives today talking about basically that Guilbeault doesn't know what he's talking about and he doesn't really understand the market.
But in the meantime, Minister Guilbeault, I'm not sure if you saw his comments this week, said that nothing further should be built unless and until the infrastructure that is in place is used at capacity. And I wonder what you made of those comments, how you reconcile all of those different things.
Well, the fact of the matter is Trans Mountain is, by various estimates, are expected to be, the Trans Mountain pipeline is set to be filled by 2027. What we're looking to try and do is be able to have additional, when you think about pipelines, specifically oil pipelines, what we're trying to essentially do is to be able to get a pipeline in service in 3 years. That's essentially 6 months for approvals, another 6 months for full engineering, 2 years of construction. That's 3 years, which is essentially when the next pipeline is going to be needed. I think there's maybe a little bit of confusion as to what the market demand was.
Now, Guilbeault not understanding the market is a bit of an understatement. The guy's a complete radical. All he thinks about is one thing and one thing only. But even the next panelist explains how he doesn't get it. He was going on and on about how we need to utilize what we have right now. It's not even at certain capacity, yada, yada, yada. She proves that, well, that's not how you build things. You don't wait till it's at full capacity to then advance. You look at and plan ahead.
Let's start with the Steven Guilbeault comments that were in part inaccurate in terms of how much capacity the Trans Mountain was actually using, but also making the suggestion that a pipeline is not needed until everything's running at capacity. How did that go over out there?
You might imagine that fell pretty flat, that messaging. And of course, Premier Danielle Smith has already brought up these concerns about Guilbeault and the comments that the the vibe of the new environment minister as well. But that idea that you only need to build capacity, you only need to build something once you're at capacity is pretty much proven to be incorrect. When it comes to pipelines, when it comes to roads, when it comes to any form of infrastructure, power lines, whatever you want to look at it, you've got to start preparing. You've got to start building things for the future. And that's what the new energy minister is really going to have.
Now, what she said there is obviously how a infrastructure should be built and maintained. You got to work proactively and not reactively, unlike what the Liberals have done for the past 10 years. Now, the CEO did mention his disappointment in Mark Carney and his campaign because he went against everything that the CEO and the oil companies had put forward that Danielle Smith had also brought up. But he did mention that something that you say on the campaign, it can definitely be different than the actions that you actually implement.
Frankly, it was disappointing, the response from Mark Carney on the campaign trail. For instance, we said we're going to have to need to scrap C-69, the so-called No More Pipelines bill. He said no. We're going to have to scrap the hard cap on emissions. He said no. We said you're going to have to scrap the federal industrial carbon tax. He said no. We said you need a hard approval project for approvals of 6 months. He said 2 years. So it was fairly discouraging during the campaign. Now, having said that, sometimes what's said in a campaign and actually what gets implemented parties in government can be two very different things.
Now, I don't disagree with what he said. However, when it comes to the Liberals, they just really enjoy double speaking, where they are saying whatever the person who's listening wants to hear. And that is a big problem that we need to be cautious of, because they can just keep saying, we removed the consumer carbon tax, get everybody very excited, and then boom, we get the consumer carbon tax back because they actually haven't removed it, but they've told you they have, and that's what you wanted to hear. So yes, anything is possible, but I would be still very weary when it comes to anything that any of the Liberals say, especially Mark Carney, Steven Guilbeault, the usual suspects. And funny enough, this actually ties into the last story that I wanted to cover, which was a horrendous accident that happened in the GTA over the weekend. 3 children unfortunately lost their lives as a 19-year-old allegedly drunk driving, kind of flew over the concrete medium, smashed into the minivan, and unfortunately lives were lost. But the caught my eye in this story was actually the reporter, because his mind immediately went to what's going to happen to this 19-year-old and how fast is he going to get out, because he's witnessed so many of these catch and release situations, these liberal policies that actually don't keep people in jail for the crimes they've caused, that this is kind of what he started vocalizing as soon as he was on the air. Take a look.
This is obviously impossibly tragic for the family, but also for law enforcement as well, and first responders that arrive on scene on these situations.
They are gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, life-changing for everybody, but also very frustrating for those that have done this for quite some time, Phil, because they see the same things happen over and over and over and over again. And they say the same things going on with regards to light sentencing, with regards to early release. So this is all the same old for a lot of people. But sadly, there are new people involved now who've got lifetime of grief and agony. And can I say one more thing, Phil, about our whole system? We focus a lot on rehabilitation and reintegration back into society. That's all good and fine, and that's part of the spirit of the liberal philosophy with regards to the social justice, when it comes to social justice and reintegrating people into the society. But there's got to be a form of deterrence. There's got to be a form of deterrence for crimes like this when people are convicted, not charged. This person is just charged. I'm talking in general. If somebody's charged with an offense like this, where you take the lives of others, and has everything to do with your actions, you chose to drink, you chose to pick up that gun, there needs to be more of a punishment. And the punishment is not so much for the people that did it. The punishment is for deterrence. It's for you or I to decide, we're not going to drink and drive tonight because of that last guy that did that, he just got whacked. Not to mention, he just killed a family of 6. But we don't want to have that same thing. That's what you want to have thought. So deterrent is big, and we're not seeing deterrence having a very big factor in our criminal justice system right now.
Like, this is how bad the record is and how bad the liberals have been, that it's basically scarred this reporter to immediately going to think about what's going to happen to the perpetrator. Are they just going to get out and be able to do this yet again? Maybe they haven't learned from this. They decide to drink again, if that is the case that was involved here, or they were under a substance of some sort, or again, just reckless driving. This is what the state of our country is, where not even the reporters or the police have any sort of faith in the system. And that lack of faith and trust in the system actually permeates into society. We have emboldened individuals who are now trying to kick down doors at like 4 o'clock in the morning. People canvassing parking lots and trying to break into cars. There was just a story about a woman in Vancouver who was attacked in a public bathroom/changing room by an individual who already had a previous conviction of this same sort of crime, and the police had him on their radar, but it was due to low-level crimes.
35-year-old Hartley Ronald Duckhorn was arrested outside the washroom. He's since been charged with choking, unlawful confinement, assault with a weapon, robbery, and uttering threats to cause death or bodily harm.
The victim did receive medical attention in hospital as a result of the offenses that occurred. The injuries are not what we believe to be life-threatening.
Duckhorn was convicted of violently assaulting a woman in Surrey under similar circumstances. He pleaded guilty to the weapon, unlawful confinement, and robbery in the July 2020 stranger attack near a Wally SkyTrain station. In September 2022, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. A year and a half later, Vancouver police say he was on their radar.
We began having interactions with this man around March of 2024, and we've had a number of interactions with him throughout the past year, mostly related to low-level offenses, things like thefts and drug use. Nothing certainly that rises to this level of seriousness.
This guy is a danger to women and society. Lock him up for good. How many other women need to be attacked by this guy for you to get that through your head? But with all this being said, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. If you can, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, which is awesome. We were a little bit above 53,000. We've come back down. It's been a while since I uploaded. I get it. But yeah, if we can get back up, that'd be awesome. And until next time, catch you guys later.